We found a massive footprint that sank deep into the soil. At first, we didn't recognize it as a footprint at all. It looked like a depression left by some slow geological process, a place where the forest floor had simply given up and collapsed inward. The soil there was pressed smooth and dense, darker than the surrounding earth, as if compacted by an impossible, sustained weight. Ferns lay flattened at the edges, their stems unbroken but bent permanently downward, frozen in a posture of submission. The shape was wrong, too long, too deep, the suggestion of toes only barely implied, as though whatever had made it did not need to articulate its steps the way living things do. The woods around us were silent in a way that felt deliberate. Not the natural quiet of a place between bird calls, but an enforced stillness, like a held breath. The trees stood impossibly tall and close together, their trunks rising straight and dark into a canopy so dense it erased the sky entirely. Light filtered down in thin, stale shafts, greenish and weak, and it seemed to avoid the footprint, bending around it instead of touching the compressed soil at its center. No one spoke for a long time. When I finally crouched beside the impression, the smell reached me. Wet loam mixed with something older and sharper, like stone ground against stone. I pressed my palm near the edge. The earth was cold, unnaturally so, and hard as packed clay despite the recent rain. Whatever had stepped here hadn't simply passed through. It had arrived. That was when the forest reacted. A distant creak echoed through the trees, not snapping wood but something shifting under strain. The sound didn't come from one direction. It seemed to radiate outward, as if the woods themselves were adjusting to accommodate a change. Leaves trembled high above us, though no wind touched our faces. Shadows deepened, sliding slowly across the ground, subtly redrawing the boundaries of space. We had heard the stories before coming out here. Old ones, shared reluctantly by locals who avoided the deeper trails. They spoke of vanished hikers, of camps found crushed inward, of clearings that appeared overnight and then refused to be found again. The explanations were never consistent, but the rules were. Don't follow prints you can't match. Don't linger where the forest goes quiet. If the ground feels wrong beneath your feet, turn back. We broke all of them. As we stood there, another footprint appeared. Not suddenly, no thunderous step, no cracking branches, but gradually, as if the soil were remembering something that had already happened. The ground a few yards ahead of us began to sink. Leaves slid inward. Roots bowed and disappeared beneath the surface. Over the course of several slow, unbearable seconds, the shape resolved itself into a second impression, nearly identical to the first, aligned as though part of a stride too large to comprehend. The light shifted again, thinning, dimming, as though the forest were drawing its attention inward. Sound distorted. I heard my own breathing arrive a heartbeat late. Somewhere nearby, a bird let out a single broken call and then fell silent. We backed away together, careful not to turn our backs on the impressions. The terrain subtly changed under our boots. Slopes steepened where they hadn't before. Fallen logs lay across our path, newly positioned, forcing us to detour. The forest wasn't blocking us outright. It was guiding us, nudging our movement in gentle, insistent increments. A third footprint emerged behind us. Panic threatened then, sharp and immediate, but the woods seemed to punish haste. When one of us stumbled, the sound of the fall echoed too loudly, flattening and stretching unnaturally. The shadows surged in response, thickening around our ankles like pooled ink. We slowed, breathing shallow, movements measured. The footprints continued to form, not in a straight line but in a subtle arc that curved around us. Each new depression pressed deeper into the earth than the last. The soil at their centers had begun to darken to near black, absorbing light completely. When I stared too long, my eyes watered, my head filling with a low pressure that felt like altitude sickness. It dawned on me then that the prints were not leading toward us. They were enclosing us. The forest leaned inward as the space between the trees narrowed. Trunks groaned softly, bark flexing. The canopy above shifted, branches knitting together until even the weak daylight faded into a uniform gloom. The air grew heavier, colder, carrying that same mineral scent, now threaded with something faintly metallic. At the center of the forming ring, the ground began to rise. Not burst, not tear, but lift, as though pushed gently from below by something patient and immense. Soil slid aside without scattering. Roots surfaced intact, bending away. The shape beneath did not fully emerge, but its presence was undeniable. A mass displacing space, altering the geometry of the clearing simply by existing within it. I felt a strange sensation then, as if my outline were being traced. Not touched, but measured. Memories surfaced unbidden. Old rooms, forgotten conversations, the precise sound of my name spoken by people long gone. The pressure behind my eyes intensified, and I understood, with sickening clarity, that the forest was not hostile. It was attentive. We left offerings without speaking, coins, scraps of gear, anything that could be surrendered. The forest accepted them immediately. Moss thickened, soil closed. The rising shape settled back beneath the ground, the pressure easing as though a decision had been made. The footprints remained. A path opened through the trees, subtle but unmistakable. We followed it without question, moving slowly, reverently, until the canopy loosened and the light thinned into something resembling normal daylight. Only when we reached the edge of the woods did the silence finally break, birdsong returning in fractured pieces. Later, when we tried to explain what we'd seen, the words failed us. The prints we photographed were gone when we returned, the forest floor unmarked, soft and ordinary. But sometimes, when I stand alone on packed earth, I feel it again, that sense of scale shifting, of ground remembering weight. And I wonder whether the footprints marked where it had walked, or where it had paused to see if we were worth stepping on. A long, low howl echoed through the woods, too deep to be an animal. It didn't rise or fall the way a wolf's cry should. There was no hunger in it, no territorial challenge. The sound arrived whole, a single vast note dragged across the forest floor, vibrating through trunks and bone alike. I felt it more than I heard it, a pressure behind the eyes and under the ribs, as if something enormous had exhaled and the world was still catching up. The woods went still in response. Not quiet, still. Leaves froze mid-rustle. Insects cut off as if silenced by command. Even the wind seemed to halt, trapped between one breath and the next. The canopy above us swallowed the sky completely, branches woven so tightly that moonlight could only leak through in thin, uneven seams. Those seams wavered now, bending slightly, as though the air itself had thickened. No one spoke. We stood shoulder to shoulder on the narrow trail, packs hanging heavy, every instinct screaming that noise would be a mistake. The howl lingered far longer than it should have, echoing without bouncing, flattening distance until it felt both impossibly far away and directly behind us. Then the ground shifted. It was subtle at first, just enough that my footing felt wrong. The slope beneath my boots adjusted, not collapsing, not rising, but rearranging. Roots pressed closer to the surface, their shapes outlined beneath the soil like knuckles under skin. The trail we'd followed for hours narrowed, curving where it hadn't before, guiding our steps without asking permission. Another howl answered the first. This one was closer, not louder, closer. The sound bent oddly around the trees, arriving from several directions at once, its edges distorted, as if filtered through water. My ears rang, then popped, then rang again. I realized with a slow, creeping dread that the echoes weren't fading. They were stacking. The forest reacted in pieces. A tree to our left leaned away from the sound, its roots lifting partially free of the earth before settling again. Farther off, something cracked, wood under pressure, bending but not breaking. Shadows slid across the ground independent of any moving light source, pooling at the bases of trunks, stretching longer than they should have. We had heard the stories before coming out here. Old ones, spoken carefully by people who lived near the forest but never in it. They talked about nights when the woods listened, about sounds that changed the rules, about how some calls were meant to locate, others to gather, and a few rare ones were meant to measure. The third howl rolled through the trees like distant thunder trapped underground. With it came silence so complete it felt invasive. My own breathing sounded foreign, too loud, arriving late to my ears. When I shifted my weight, the crunch of leaves stretched unnaturally, smearing across seconds instead of instants. Sound no longer obeyed distance or time. It arrived when it wanted to. We tried to turn back. The forest resisted gently. Fallen branches lay across the trail where none had been before. A stand of saplings crowded closer together, forcing us to pass single file. The terrain sloped inward, subtly funneling us forward rather than blocking us outright. It felt less like being trapped and more like being directed. The air grew colder, not evenly, but in waves, pockets of chill that slid past like unseen bodies. Each one carried a faint smell: wet stone, old bark, something mineral and sharp. With every breath, my chest tightened, not from panic but from pressure, as though the atmosphere itself were deepening. A fourth howl sounded. This one did not echo. It simply existed, vast and immediate, resonating through the ground beneath our feet. The soil vibrated, a low-frequency hum that traveled up through my legs and settled in my teeth. Around us, the trees bowed, not in fear, but in recognition. Branches angled inward. Leaves turned their pale undersides outward, exposing themselves like offerings. We reached a clearing without choosing to. The trees retreated just enough to form a wide circle of bare earth, packed smooth and dark. No grass grew there. No fallen leaves lingered. The moonlight that reached the clearing bent strangely, curving toward the center before thinning into nothing, as though swallowed by an unseen depth. At the far edge of the clearing, the forest floor began to sink. Not violently, patiently. Soil compressed, roots sliding aside intact, making space. The shape beneath did not fully emerge, but its presence pressed against reality hard enough to warp it. I could not see it, yet my eyes refused to look away, skidding over a void too large to process. The howls stopped. In their absence, something else made itself known. Not a sound, but an awareness. A sense of being observed from multiple angles at once. My thoughts felt heavier, slower, as if passing through resistance. Memories surfaced unbidden. Childhood fears, half-forgotten dreams of being watched from tree liens, the instinctive certainty that some places were not meant to be entered. The forest was utterly still now. I understood then that the howls had not been calls to attack. They were signals. A warning, perhaps, or an announcement, or a question posed to the woods itself. The ground beneath the clearing rose slightly, enough to suggest immense mass just below the surface, waiting, measuring. The pressure intensified until my vision blurred, edges darkening. Beside me, someone dropped their pack. Another let a flashlight slip from numb fingers. The forest accepted these offerings immediately, soil closing over them as if sealing records. Slowly, the pressure eased. The clearing did not return to normal. The forest did not relax, simply paused, as though a decision had been deferred rather than denied. A narrow path opened between the trees, subtle but unmistakable. We followed it without speaking, moving carefully, reverently, until the canopy loosened and the oppressive weight lifted just enough to breathe again. We never heard the howls behind us as we left. That was what frightened me most. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that first sound in my head, long, low, impossibly deep, and I wonder whether it was meant to scare us away, or to see who would stay when the forest answered back.